Times Media and Broadcasting. Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live video series. With us today to share the stories behind the 10 books that influenced him the most on his life path is internationally renowned writer, musician, teacher, and leading authority on sound healing, Jonathan Goldman. A pioneer in the field of harmonics, Jonathan is the author of several books, including The Divine Name, the 2011 Visionary Award for Best Alternative Book of the Year, and The 7 Secrets of Sound Healing. A Grammy nominee, his award-winning recordings include Chakra, I never know which way to pronounce it, Chakra Chants and The Divine Name. And he's the founder and director of the Sound Healers Association and CEO of Spirit Music. As always, if you have questions for Jonathan, feel free to post them in the chat window as we go along, and we'll address them before the end of this session. And now, Jonathan Goldman, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Sandie, or Sandra. How are you?
You can call me Sandie. It's so funny because all my English family call me Sandra. All my American family call me Sandie, which is perfect for a Gemini. You know, I answer to both. There's 2 of me. So I'm good, thank you, Jonathan. And I'm so happy to have you with us today. And your list is very interesting. One book in particular, which we will get to later, has really had me perplexed because trying to track it down was not easy. And then once I did, trying to find information about it was even harder. So I'm looking forward to your description of it. So before we start discussing your 10 best spiritual books, 2 questions we always ask our guests. And the first is, what do books mean to you?
What an excellent question. What do books mean to me? From a really, really early age, I guess anybody who reads, but particularly for myself, I was transported to realms of imagination and consciousness. In fact, yesterday, our dear son, who is in law school, came to visit us, and we were talking about The Wizard of Oz, which he is listening to now as an audible. And I said, I used to sit on my mother's knee, and she would read The Wizard of Oz books to me, and we were talking about the many levels of The Wizard of Oz, which is, a wee bit different from the Judy Garland movie, if you like. There's some aspects of that that are, shall we say, quite unique, but books have always been a way of, for myself, escaping, to the degree that I've also been really interested in writing and literary writing, not a textbook type writing, but literary writing, to the degree that when I was in 8th grade, I actually wrote my first novel, and I gave it to a teacher in a notebook who promptly lost it. I was crushed. When I was 16, I went to a very, shall we say, interesting, what one would call a private school here in the United States, and I would go back because I was very, very unhappy when I would get to my parents' home, and I would just go into my room and I would sit at my typewriter and I would type for 2 hours before dinner. There'd be 4 hours of homework after that, but I needed to really release through writing. So I wrote my first novel, a 250-page novel when I was 16, called To Love and Die, which was a James Bond kind of knockoff. And, actually, I recently just found it, and it was, the writing is much better than I can
You
do now.
thought. Yeah, it's so interesting to go back and look at the work that we've done earlier, and sometimes we can just be astonished at how clever we were back then. Yeah. So tell me, the second question we always ask is, how easy or how challenging was it for you to compile your list?
I basically wrote a list of about 14 and knocked it down to 10. And of those, I would have included more, but I didn't want to include any of my books, which obviously I think are great books. We were allowed, I think, one on mine. And incidentally, hello to everyone who's kind enough to tune into this. I trust this will be an illuminating and enlightening and fun experience for you. But it wasn't that difficult because I think that there's some books, and for me, understand, as I believe I kind of wrote in the beginning, there were a lot of books that really shifted and changed my life when I was younger, whether it was the Oz books or the James Bond books or the Tarzan books, or when I got older, Kurt Vonnegut and all this stuff. I dealt mostly with books from when I was about 40 plus years old and was getting into the field of higher consciousness. Um, that was my sort of opening beginning time line for this phenomena. Otherwise, it would have been impossible.
And your list, that as you sent it, is not in any particular order, isn't it? It's not the order that you read them or the order that you rate them.
No, but as I do have a copy of the list here, and probably the first book. Well, no, that's true. It isn't. But some of them were about the same time because there was, shall we say, this explosive time in my consciousness when I really was led to find books that dealt with alternate ways of viewing the world, life, the universe, and everything, as Douglas Adams used to say. And so, what I wrote, though, is just, I guess, what came to me. Not on an autobiographical level, not on a alphabetical level, but just how my mind was working at that particular phenomena.
Yeah. So let's start with your first book, which cropped up last week, and that was The Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield, which was published in 1993. Do you remember what you were doing when you first read that book?
No.
You don't?
I don't remember what I was doing the actual, moment of reading it, except that I can tell you what was going on in my life
Yes,
around that
yes.
time, of course, which is I was in Boulder, Colorado, and among other things, I had recently moved there from the Boston area. And among other things, I was probably writing a book of mine, my first book, Healing Sounds, may have been actually written just about then, and I may have been actually even touring that. And I remember the one thing about the Celestine prophecies or Celestine prophecies, depending upon where on the earth you're from, that really got to me was that it was the first book that I remember being of, shall we say, a higher consciousness vent. It was a higher consciousness novel, and it made the bestseller list. And at the time, I thought, by gosh and by golly, what an indication that this is going to mean that all these things that I've really opened up to and been working with, maybe for the last 5 or 10 years or more, have now finally hit mainstream. I don't think that was necessarily true. And, in particular, with regard to the Celestine Prophecies, which I thought was a fine book and would have made a fine movie, and I have a degree in filmmaking, so I'm oftentimes always looking at books to see if there would be a good movie. I thought this would be a very good movie, but it didn't get made into a movie until several years later. I'm going to say 3, 4, 5, even 6 years later. And by then, I think some of the charisma, the charm, the magic that happened to the book did not manifest to the public. They had forgotten it. The public has a very short memory. And so the movie did not do very well. And for many people, they've forgotten the Celestine prophecies.
You know, it's interesting because I remember when that book came out, and I remember being absolutely shocked to see so many people reading it. You know, I'd go on a holiday to Spain with my children, and I'd see, you know, all kinds of people sitting by the pool reading it and thinking, wow, this is really going mainstream. You know, and that's a great thing. And you're right. A lot of it then kind of dissipated. I think a lot of people may have put their head up above the parapet for a short while and then, you know, got caught up in life and forgot.
Right. I often, this is a totally different question, but I often wonder why things catch on, and then also why we have such a short memory span. Because
Probably because life's so fast.
I guess so. And, you know, I mean, because doing this list was a great trip through on a level memory lane in terms of some of the books that, you know, really shifted and changed me. And many of them I had forgotten about, some not, but, you know, all of a sudden I'd be sitting there and like this, you know, one of them that I know we're going to talk about a little bit later came into my consciousness and I went, wow, that book really shifted and changed me. And as you note, it's all but disappeared and how and why. And I find it just so very, very unique.
And then we contrast that with number 2, which Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda, which has been out there for 70 years and is still turning up on everybody's lists.
Well, also, you know, okay, so I'm very big into audibles right now. For the
Me
last
too.
number of years, actually. And I find that for some reason, oftentimes, if I can have a visceral experience where I can listen to the book and then read it or vice versa, and there's actually ways of listening to it and reading it, it affects me a whole lot more. So I have Autobiography of a Yogi on Audible and highly recommended. George Harrison produced it. And it is read by Ben Kingsley, who, of course, is the voice of Gandhi. So there you have George Harrison producing Gandhi, doing Autobiography of a Yogi, and I love the connection there. But just a moment before on Celestine
Yeah.
prophecies, so there were these different insights, and they were like fabulous insights that, on a level we might take for granted, something such as you know. We're all related in, you know, consciousness or something like that. Something simple, and then there would be a chapter that was relating to that, and the hero would have this a huge epiphany. And I mean, what's so interesting about that is that many of the, shall we say, the insights that were revealed in Celestine Prophecy, whether or not we remember the book, these insights have encoded themselves into almost every aspect of higher consciousness these days. And we just take it for granted. While at that time, it was like, huh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, you're so right.
Autobiography of a Yogi. Well, I trust everyone has read Autobiography of a Yogi, and if you haven't, it's sort of a must. It was one of Elvis Presley's books on his nightstand. And
Was it?
how much more can you say about a book than it was on Elvis's nightstand in Memphis, Tennessee? Paramahansa Yogananda. What an interesting, extraordinary person who was one of the major key people responsible for bringing yoga to the West. And as a dear friend of mine who is a major psychologist, and back when I was in college in the late 70s, in film school, playing in a rock and roll band, being a sort of a semi-wild and crazy person. This person went from being semi-wild and crazy to studying yoga, and literally going over to India to studying it. He was the first person I knew in becoming a vegetarian. How weird is that? I couldn't believe it. And I remember we were talking about this book recently, and he said, you know, if even half the information in there is at all real, everybody ought to be practicing yoga because the stories in it are totally phenomenologically brilliant, interesting, miraculous, and truly fascinating.
Yeah, they are indeed. Yeah. And I think when I read that book, I mean, it stayed with me for weeks. For weeks. I just could not believe some of the experiences he had and thinking, is it really that easy? You know, is it that easy? I don't have an answer to that one, but he made it seem as though it all just flowed for him.
It's so interesting. Once again, just the greatest respect for Paramahansa Yogananda, for the different people I have actually up here. This is in my desk area, and there are pictures of Tibetan monks and family, and I have a picture of Mark Twain, and I have a picture of Sri Yukteswar, who is Yogananda's guru, up here too, and as well as a man by the name of Ramana Maharshi's there, and who else? My dear wife and son, and some Tibetan entities and all that stuff. But yeah, so it's a great learning experience, and it's really well written. And I will also say that recently on, I think, Netflix or one of these, there was a documentary about Yogananda, which is quite interesting because he had, toward the end of his life, which he didn't write about in the book, some kind of, shall we say, betrayals by his person he left second in command, and he went back over to India to do something. And when he came back, this guy tried to take over the ashram. And by gosh and by golly, I mean, you think, well, regardless of how spiritually advanced you are, we still got to deal with the lower life challenges that
Yeah.
exist for us.
I'll have to look out for that documentary. I haven't ever come across that before.
I believe it's called Awake.
Awake. Okay. I shall look for it. Okay, so number 3, The Nature of Personal Reality, Jane Roberts, 1974.
Okay, I'm going, yeah. All right. So, I remember when I first read that. I don't remember how old I was. I think I may well have been in college or, perhaps in grad school at the time. And the book truly blew my mind because there was so much of it that is inherent in a lot of the higher consciousness awareness today, particularly of the fact that for the most part, it seems like we create our own reality. And I think that this book was the first one. It was channeled, okay. Jane Roberts would channel a being called Seth, and Seth would speak. And this is one of the Seth Speak books, and it's my favorite. And Sandie, what I particularly like about this is that I was talking to a youngin, as I call him now, uh, fairly recently, within the last few months perhaps, and they were talking to me about they had found this great new book called The Nature of Personal Reality. I was going, yes, it was wonderful, and I was very pleased to see that it was still back up there, in Amazon and whatnot, and B, that I could also get it as a Audible. So I listened to that one also as an Audible, and it was a great and wondrous experience. Is that one you resonated with?
I have to confess, of all the gazillion books I've read, I've never picked up one of Jane's. Never.
Okay. It's, no, that's
Okay.
that's very fine, but I think you might find out of all the quote channeled books, whether it's Abraham or whatnot, that Seth was the original being. And if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
and I may not be mistaken in this because it may have been something that I recently came across. There was a whole thing of Seth talking about epidemics and pandemics as being more than physical causes, and about them being necessary as collective consciousness manifestations, which is very interesting being
Wow.
written in the 1970s. Although I did find out that when I was at Woodstock in 1969, there was a pandemic going around, and I didn't know about this. How extraordinary. There's
I read that.
the Hong
Yes.
Kong flu. It's like, whoa, I didn't know. All right. So the nature of personal reality, once again, highly recommended. I think it's one, there is no original source, obviously, but shall we say, in the last, for the most part, in the second half of the 19th century, this is probably the most profound and powerful book on creating your own reality. Actually, the first one that manifested. So kudos and recommendations to that.
I have to actually, I won't read it. I will get it on Audible. That'll be much more enjoyable.
It actually will be because on a level, it's someone speaking, being transferred to paper, then you're reading it. Here, it's somebody speaking on what was transferred to paper, and it's a good job.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you for that tip. Number 4, another one that appears frequently and another favourite of mine too, Biology of Belief, Unleashing the Power of Consciousness, Matter and Miracles by, of course, Bruce Lipton.
Yes, Bruce is a dear person. His wife Margaret, my wife Andy, and I have gone out to dinner a number of times, and he's, been on my radio show a few different times, and he's just a lovely, lovely, humble being. When I say humble being, it's just like, okay, when certain people get to a stage of notoriety, sometimes they begin to lose their, shall we say, humbleness. Not Bruce. He gets it. He loves doing it. And, I think from my perspective, this book was really perhaps the first that dealt with the concept of, once again, our belief. What of this and the nature of personal reality have to? They talk about the power of belief. This one talks about the power of belief in terms of affecting us on a physiological level, on a cellular level. In fact, when it first came out and I read it and I thought, wow, this is so very, very important. And I spoke to Bruce about it, and it seemed not to be getting the reception that it should have been getting from the medical community. And I just couldn't understand that because I thought it was so very, very important. Because we're dealing with a concept that we call placebo effect, but it doesn't mean, placebo conceptually is Latin to please. But it really does mean that whatever is happening is not affecting us on a really powerful physiological level. It simply is talking about the interconnection between mind, body, and spirit. And also, with regard to the cells, it's talking about how, if you like, energy fields affect us. And I remember 2 years ago, Time magazine had a cover story on epigenetics, which is how the gene is affected perhaps by happenings from past generations even. And I went reading it and, looking for Bruce, as we know, one of the great, founders of this field is Bruce Lipton, and his name was nowhere to be found. And I believe what had happened is that as a number of books that I didn't mention, but oftentimes the scientific community wants to ban a book or burn it if it threatens them enough. I guess they
Yes.
found this rather threatening. But it's a brilliant, brilliant, and
Yeah.
important book.
I was very excited when I read it because probably about 7 or 8 years before that, I was living in England before I moved to the USA. And I remember watching a program on television, a documentary, and they were talking about people using visualization, cancer patients, and they actually they had some kind of test where they could measure the chemicals that changed in their body. And I remember thinking, wow, that is, if that is true, then we've got the proof. Never heard anything more until this book came out. And I love it when I also, get to see the science as well. And that was a great confirmation for me that, what I'd been thinking about when I saw that TV documentary was absolutely real. That this was
There's another
possible.
fellow from your neck of the woods named Rupert Sheldrake, who's a wonderful scientist, whose books I believe have been burned by nature and whatnot.
Yes.
With this concept of morphic fields and whatnot, which is so very important. I didn't put Rupert's book down here. I had to choose a number, but his work is once again, it's interesting, the scientific community. And if you like bird walking for just a second, Sandie, simply because I think that a lot of what is occurring right now will need to be viewed from lenses of a 21st century science. And by that, I mean, I'm going to quote Asimov's law, Clarke's law, Arthur C. Clarke. And this is from Star Trek, where they call it Clarke's law, so it's a scientific principle, which is any sufficiently developed science is indistinguishable from magic. And I think a lot of what happens, including being able to create things with a consciousness, may be science, but we simply don't have the quote, dealing with just brain waves or whatnot is not going to sufficiently answer how these things manifest. But sometime we will. Sometime we will be able to measure auric fields and photograph auras and all this stuff, which, as I'm saying, this brings us to our next book, Through the Curtain.
Yes. Now, pronounce those authors' names for me.
Not a chance.
They're difficult ones, aren't they?
I think it's
not
Viola
so much the first, but the second, yeah.
I think it's Viola Pettit Neal and Shafika Carigula, or Caragula.
Caragula. 1993.
Yes, but really before that, I have a hardback that's before that. This is the republished version, which I had something to do with. And bless my wife, Andy, because I was looking for this today and I couldn't find it. And she, great Virgo being of light and love that she is, was able to lay her hands on it and say, here it is. I said, oh, great. And I basically opened it up. The original hardback that I have is all marked up and underlined, which I normally don't do, but the information was so potent and so powerful. And back in 1993, DeVore's, which is a publishing company in the United States, the publisher came to me and said, we'd like a book from you. And I just didn't want to write a book at that time. I said, gee, I don't want to write a book at this time, but there's a book which is out of print, which I think is so very, very important. And it's basically channeled information again. And channeled information at this time was really big. And so they printed the book and it came out, but unfortunately it didn't catch on. But still, here it is. And the reason, as I was, I turned to a chapter and it was about photographing the auric field in the future. And I went, whoa, because I was just thinking about that yesterday. And it had information. This woman would basically fall asleep, become and consciously go to, quote, night classes where she would be taught all sorts of information on sound, crystals, sacred geometry, healing, multidimensional fields, extraterrestrials, all sorts of stuff. And this woman, she was a psychologist, and a woman medical doctor would put her into a hypnagogic state and basically have her revive this information. And then she basically had her secretary write it up, and voila, Through the Curtain manifested. And just because it's so hard to find, wow, and there's so many different short chapters, I'll just read a few. Here's Photographing the Etheric, the Astral Body, Healing by Sound, Form, and Color, Crystals, a Source of Energy, the and this is from the 1960s probably. The We Suck Festival, Extrasensory Perception, um, the effects of love on consciousness. I'm looking through these reincarnation meditation. So it's really, unfortunately, it's out of print. You can find it for a lot of money, and if I were in a different time, in a different place, I would probably try to bring it back into print again because I think the information is so valid and so very, very important. Um, what more shall I say about it?
Not a lot more. When I went looking today, at first it wouldn't show up anywhere. And then I eventually did find it, I don't know how, on Amazon, because that's where I started the search. It didn't say anything about the book, but there were reviews. And the more reviews I read, and they were saying things like, oh my God, this book blew my mind, and the information, and I highly recommend it, but nobody would tell me what was in it.
Yeah.
It's just all these incredible things people were saying. So I thought, well, clearly that's a book that, I need to know more about. So thank you for that.
It's interesting. Here, I will, just because we have a moment, I'm going to open up and see. Okay. Boy, if you've ever read The Keys of Enoch, which did not make it to this, but if you have read The Keys of Enoch, you can tell where J.J. Hurtak got some of his. The 32 crystalline forms are the key pattern for the way the energies are built in the universe, and the key to unlocking energy in a constructive way. The atomic bomb is a destructive way to unlocking energies. It may be called the left-hand path. Knowledge of the crystalline forms may be considered the right-hand path for unlocking energy by the use of crystalline forms and sound in the audible, supersonic and infrasonic, to manipulate and direct forces. Man has not yet become basically creative. His movement into creative fields is close at hand. He will direct how to use crystalline forms to unlock, direct, and control energy and to mold and modify substances. Remember, the universe was created by sound. Very shortly, the scientists will be saying this. Wow. That just, as a sound guy, okay.
Were you a sound guy when you read it? Were you
Yes.
already working with sound?
I was already a sound guy when I read it, and a crystal guy, and this book flipped me out because we've forgotten more stuff than is in this book, for sure.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, book number 6, The God Code, The Secret of Our Past, The Promise of Our Future, Greg Braden, 2005.
A very important book to me because it opened a door. My wife Andy and I were at a workshop of Greg's because Greg was a friend of mine at the time, and he invited us to a workshop that he was giving in Denver. We were in Boulder. We went to the workshop, and Greg was doing if you like, a workshop, a lecture, talking about what is called the Tetragrammaton, or the divine name, and how this could be, shall we say, transduced or decoded into various things. And I turned to Andy and said, my God, he's teaching Kabbalah. And some years before, I had basically had this reawakening experience of discovering what is called the divine name. And I basically put it on the back shelf because I thought it was too powerful. But once Greg had been teaching this, we went out to dinner. I said, Greg, I've made a discovery of how the actual divine name is sounded. And I said, I will make a recording for you if you basically promise that you have people turn off their tape machines. And what happened was basically that someone didn't. I made this recording. It was very powerful. Someone didn't, and it started manifesting on the internet. And I thought, well, by gosh and by golly, if this is going to manifest on the internet, I really want to do a high fidelity version of that. And that then allowed me to release Sounds of the God Code, which is the first of, after that, I wrote a book called The Divine Name, and it's a very, very powerful sound. So blessings be to Greg. Has written so many wonderful books, and he and Bruce, and actually a fellow by the name of Joe Dispenza, who I don't think I have on here, are this strange triumvirate of beings together. But bless them because for bringing a higher consciousness. And I know with Andy's book club, she's got a book by Greg as well. Because how can you not?
How can you not? Absolutely, yeah. So, book number 7, Madame Blavatsky's Baboon, A History of the Mystics, Mediums and Misfits Who Brought Spiritualism to America by Peter Washington, 1993.
Madame Blavatsky's Baboon, recommended to me by a dear friend. When I first tried finding it, it was very difficult. It seems to me somehow to be coming out a little bit more out of the woodwork. I will say, so a confession to me is that as much as I want to believe in all the extraordinary things in Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi, I also have, shall we say, firsthand knowledge that many, many people who are highly advanced spiritual teachers have feet of clay. It's just my belief system. And this book was certainly a verification and validation of that because it deals with all sorts of really well-known people who've brought forth some great information, yet at the same time have done things that were, shall we say, either perhaps unethical or whatnot. And I really liked it because it just reminds at least me to realize that regardless of how divine we may think we are, we still are just learners, beginners, and shouldn't get our egos infused with anything because we can easily fall. And there are just so many stories of so many different people. Who do we have here? Madame Blavatsky, for example, Gurdjieff, Shiner, Krishnamurti, and not bad things, but just things that made them human.
Yes.
And perhaps Madame Blavatsky was indeed, while she was creating the Theosophical Society and writing all these extraordinary books, perhaps she also, in order to make a living or whatnot, was doing seances, and perhaps some of her seances were, shall we say, raided by the police, and they saw people under the table ringing bells and knocking the table and whatnot. Okay, and the title comes from, she had a baboon there directly and to contrast Darwin's thoughts on evolution. And what's so interesting, of course, is like one of Greg Braden's more recent books, I think called Human by Design or something like that, may be that one, but talks about the fact that that evolution may not be all that it's cracked up to be, because indeed there may have been some genetic manipulation about 200,000 years ago, scientifically proven, that has been written about in a lot of different, shall we say, esoteric texts. And here's Madame Blavatsky with her baboon having been told that by the channel beings from the other side. So once again, you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Another thing that I've really learned, I think that this book is so important, because we have a tendency of just, somebody does something, they write a great book, and we think, oh my goodness gracious, how wonderful. And then we see that they've done something that perhaps is human, and we lose all faith in them. All people who, leave the cult that they're involved in, or the following that they do, or they denigrate all the teachings. No.
Yeah. I think, the way I look at that, and I've come across a lot of that too, is that it could be a way of these teachers, and I don't know whether that would be conscious or unconscious, showing us that we have to practice discernment, and that it's the message and not necessarily the messenger that counts.
Beautiful. I mean, yes, the statement that guru spells G, you are you. And, the concept that, yes, exactly, discernment. And it saddens me. right? I have to jump for a moment if we have time, just for a second.
Sure.
There is a really fun documentary called Kumari, and it is about a guy who, kind of as a goof, basically he's Indian, grew up in New Jersey, and he basically puts on robes, studies yoga for about 6 months, and starts just to see what'll happen. Starts going around uh, as a holy man from India, and begins teaching, and he begins getting a following, and finally, at the very, very end, he decides to do the big reveal. And the big reveal is he comes out, takes his robes off, cuts his hair, comes in wearing a tuxedo, and says, "This is who I really am. I've just been basically pulling your leg." And half the people get up and they leave, and half the people go, "No, you are a true teacher, and you've simply come to grips with who you are on the external." Brilliant. And I think it's true because I think the guy had a whole lot of stuff that he was channeling and bringing forth. And people recognize that. And other people, "Oh my God, you took advantage of us, you made fun of us." And he didn't really. He wasn't like, being making fun of them, but he basically he wanted to, he did it sort of as a social experiment. So it's a very good movie.
I think the ones that, get offended by it, they've given their power away. And that's what they're offended by, the fact that they've given their power away.
I think you're very, very right. We seem to want to find that divine father, mother on the earth plane, so many people, so we follow different teachers and gurus and let them make our decisions for us. And as you're saying, that is, if you like, not empowering ourselves, giving our power away. And it's a path that a lot of people seem to need to go through, Sandie, and I don't know why.
I don't know why either, but I have read quite a bit about it, especially in light of how authoritarian regimes, are created and
Yeah.
how they get people to follow them. And there seems to be psychologically, I think it was Wilhelm Reich, said psychologically we have, when things are shaky, we all want to go to daddy, let daddy take care of it. It doesn't have to be me. And that's when people like Hitler, people like Trump, people like, can step forward and people will hand over the power to them.
Well, it's so interesting. As you're mentioning that, there's another book, and I can't remember the name of it. It has charisma in the title. It's something like Dark Charisma or something like that. But it basically was written by a woman, political Harvard PhD profiler on basically people who have narcissistic personalities, and we don't even need to name anybody, but you just name one who basically, and there seems to be a phenomena that they found called the wounded narcissist, which means the wounded narcissist needs to find the narcissist who is so sociopathic that they, will not acknowledge that they have done anything wrong. And the wounded, shall we say, narcissist goes to them for healing, which may be an explanation.
Maybe. Yeah. 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 Well, it takes all kinds. Book number 8, Stalking the Wild Pendulum on the Mechanics of Consciousness, 1977. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. Ishtak Bentov, with a preface by my friend, Professor William Tiller, who is just the most incredible man.
Bentov I didn't know him. It was my great pleasure to be friends after he passed away with his wife who lived in the Boston area. She was a sculptress, and she tried to carry on his work with some things, but he was just brilliant beyond belief, and he could present the most advanced concepts as though you were a child. And I love that. So that oftentimes he would have these silly little drawings in his books and make up little stories to go along with it. And it was a place that I first learned about entrainment. It was a place I first learned about how perhaps to encode intentionality onto your consciousness. It talked about all these different things. And just as a thought, and I don't know why, but I do recall that long before I ever read the book, it was Christmas Eve, if I'm not mistaken. I remember watching the news when I was fairly young. I can't remember how old I was. And there were these two 747s that collided over Chicago, probably in the late 60s in a snowstorm. And it,
I remember hearing about that,
yeah,
yes.
and he was on one of them, and he was on his way over to Japan because, among other things, he developed all sorts of incredible biomedical instrumentation. And he was on his way over to Japan to meet with a guy by the name of Hiroshi Motoyama, who was inventing something called the chakra instrument, talking about photographing the etheric field, and between the two of them, they were going to create a method of photographing the etheric field. Didn't happen. He got taken out. But his book is brilliant and wonderful. And once you read that, I mean, I just don't know anybody who hasn't read it and come away with some sort of truly aha moment.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how that's not an uncommon experience. We see somebody absolutely brilliant on, on their way to do something really important, and boom, they're gone. Yeah.
That's it. It really makes you wonder.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So, book number 9, Music, Physician for Times to Come, edited by Don Campbell, 1991.
Okay, so Don Campbell is, first of all, he's a person who was one of the first artists on my music label, Spirit Music. He is also the person who wrote a book that a lot of people have heard of, which is much more famous, that started a whole trend in understanding the power of music called The Mozart Effect.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also, we are most blessed to be, because he's the person who introduced my wife Andy to me.
Oh, well, there you go.
So, bless Don. And this was, I think, a great book because he edited it and he's got some writing in it. And there's some wonderful spiritual, scientific, and just, out there information on how sound and music can be used to heal. And it was such a wide, diverse category of subjects in the sound. What is that? Sound healing. That's a subject. Yeah. Well, there are a lot of subcategories. Whether it's Alfred Tomatis's work with how we listen and how we hear, to David Hike's talking about harmonics, to someone else talking about sonic entrainment. Actually, that was me. That was my first published work on that. That was from a paper that I wrote for these scientists. And it was just beautiful and wonderful and highly recommended. And when I started a School of Sound in Boulder in around 1991, 1992, I was able to use this because it's almost as though every week we would touch on a subject, and then I'd be able to amplify the subject by having them read a chapter that was related to it in the book, mantras, whatever. It's great. So kudos to Don for that one. And
yeah, indeed. And isn't it interesting that now there seems to be an explosion of interest, and science is finally beginning to do its job and start investigating. And there are quite a few scientific studies out there about the power of sound. I remember working on a book recently, and I had to do a lot of research on sound and light. and coming across this old YouTube video. I say old, it's probably sometime in the last 10 years, where a doctor was showing, he actually had video of sound destroying cancer cells.
Yes, yes, that would, I mean, I can actually, that's, I know the fellow from Skidmore University, and I believe actually mentioned that in the last book, which is here, and it's interesting, but also getting back to Don for a second, he did talk about the work of Dr. Alfred Tomatis, who had done groundbreaking work on the ear, and on the conscious ear, and unconscious listening, and how the ear is basically, from his perception, the first organ to be formed in the body, and that the brain grows out of the ear. And this man was a major otolaryngologist from Paris, and he passed away. And unfortunately, very, very few people now in the sound field who are up and coming and getting into it have even heard of him, so therefore don't know about his work with the ear, with listening, and he actually did a lot of work with humming, etc. So he was very, very extraordinary being, and it's so interesting how, one of the things making this list makes me also realize how there's some incredible stepladder groundbreaking books that occur and how they disappear. And I don't know what you can say about that one, but that is a whole nother topic.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I'm so enthusiastic about the book club, because we need to hear about these books, these incredibly valuable, useful, full of information books that are getting sidelined because there's so many new books coming out and so much, money being spent on the new ones, so that people don't even know about the older ones. But I think, there's many people that are standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say, and it's the giants that we need to be looking at.
Yeah, and I'm also going to just acknowledge on a level, because of the ease with which one can manifest a book, a recording, even a film. I think we're talking perhaps about giving away our power, and also I think there is, on a level, it's easy because we're being deluged by so much information that it's really easy to lose our lack of discrimination about what is real versus what is not. And it used to be, when a lot of these books were written, if they were channeled, they were channeled. If they were based on scientific information, they were based upon scientific information. Oftentimes now you're finding information that is channeled being presented as scientific information. And there are all these quotes from well-known people, from Nikola Tesla to Albert Einstein, that they didn't say, but they're attributed to them, and then you have to really dig really deep to find out that Einstein did not say everything in the universe is in vibration. It's true, but he's not and it's attributed to him, but he didn't say that. So that sort of thing, there's a lot of misinformation now because you don't have the editorial process that you had back when a lot of these books were being created. If they were channeled, once again, they were channeled. If they were scientific, well, then the editors really made you go there and index your data and make sure your stuff is real as opposed to you just making it up. There are people I know of who write books and using as their major form of research, they go through the internet. And you can find anything and prove anything through the internet. It doesn't mean it's real, although it does mean that somebody thinks it.
Yeah. Discernment. Yeah. And be your own researcher as well. So let's move on to number 10. And this is a book that I feel very, very warmly about. You and I had a conversation, me and Andy had a conversation a month or so ago on the radio show, The Humming Effect. And the reason I love this, Jonathan, because it's your book, but not just because it's your book, but the reason I love it is I love simplicity. And I love the fact that, we have everything we need. We just need to know about it. And this just gives people a great tool that they don't even know that they've got. So talk to us about The Humming Effect, which has only been out, 3 years?
Right, and I will say also that it is available as an Audible and a Kindle. Here it is. Got it right here because got to have it right next to me because it's
Of
next to
course
my
you do.
heart.
Yeah.
The basic bottom line is I have been in this field of using sound as a healing modality for over 40 years. My wife Andy has been in the field for over 25 years. So between us, we're almost old enough to make the age of one of us, but we're a little bit older than that. And we found that one of the great difficulties with people learning to use sound for healing is that they confuse a sound with music and that they think that they need to be a trained musician or a trained vocalist in order to be used sound to vibrate themselves and feel and experience the therapeutic benefits of their own self-created sounds. So we kind of looked at each other and said, okay, what's a sound that people will not be judgmental about, that everybody can do, children, old people, doesn't matter. We looked at each other and went, and it's the hum. I said, okay, let's write a book on humming. This will be the world's first professionally published book on humming. How are we going to get people to take this seriously? And okay, well, we got to make the first chapter nothing more or less than peer review. That's scientific, medical, documented information on the physiological benefits of humming. And we did that, and after that, everything just sort of opened up. And people now, say to people, just by making a hum, you get the creation of melatonin, you get the creation of nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator. If you do it, take a nice, what we call a conscious hum, you take a deep breath, you hum, you do this a few times, it'll lower your heart rate and respiration. Oh, I've seen it go down in a couple minutes, 10 points or more. I was just on the internet and I saw an electronic device that you put on your head and you can pay $300 and it'll do the same thing in 20 minutes. So, I mean, I just love the fact, and particularly in this particular point in time and space that we're dealing with, it has been found that nitric oxide, particularly nasal nitric oxide, which occurs when you hum, you get the generation of nitric oxide in your nasal cavity, and that is a place where a lot of viruses can manifest first before they take off in the rest of the body. So what if humming, and it's been suggested by a number of doctors, could be used as a tool, as an antiviral agent? What a concept. How profoundly easy and simple. And hey, it's
Free.
so with that one, we love the book. We're so very, very proud of it. And it's just you know how they used to say that marijuana was a gateway drug. It'll open you up to different. Well, from us, humming is a gateway sound. You start humming, and it'll open you up to the whole realm of sound healing. And you may not, as with marijuana, whatever you're doing, may not take you any further than that which you're doing. But it's a fabulous entry point that opens up a portal to light, sound, and love.
And it's something that you can very easily get children to do.
Totally, totally. Children love it. And, we've got the downloadable exercises in it and all sorts of stuff. So it's just something way proud. And thank you for allowing me to put it on the list. And thank you all for perhaps checking it out, because if you are able to find resonance and experience it, then you might be able to share that information with somebody else. And so therefore it well may happen as a sort of domino effect of sound. And we can all of a sudden become I think the subtitle of the book is Sound Healing for Health and Happiness. And you also get the release, for example, of oxytocin when you hum.
Yes.
What's wrong with that?
And there's something else about nitric oxide too. I mean, I don't know how many people know this, but Viagra was actually created because of some research with nitric oxide. So, for the men out there who need a little lift, humming.
That is very, very true. It was chosen as a molecule of the year sometime in the early 2000s. And I just, I mean, how cool is that, that we can do this ourselves?
Yeah,
I love, once again, self-empowerment is so important. We are now at a time when sound and music as a healing modality is really beginning to take over. But if you can take some nice deep hums, uh, and basically get yourself in a deep state of relaxation, how wonderful is that? You don't need anything else. You got it all. You can
yeah,
do it.
yeah. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. So, keywords. I asked you when you were compiling your list to come up with some keys, and you have teacher, author, musician, healing sounds pioneer. I always ask on these interviews our guests to give us a little deeper, more intimate insight into them by giving us a word that maybe just their friends or their loved ones would apply to them. Some really secret noun about the kind of person you are. What else is Jonathan beyond all these things?
He's a heyoka. That is a Native American word for a trickster, a joker.
A trickster, a joker. How do you spell that word?
I think it's Heyyoka.
Okay. Heyoka. I
But
like that. Trickster.
they would be the sacred clowns.
Yeah, yeah.
And at times I like that. For example, I was being interviewed yesterday for a radio show, and this person said, "Well, Jonathan, now here's the time to really toot your horn and tell us how great you are and everything. What are some of your great accomplishments?" And seriously said, the first thing I said is, "Well, the first thing I've learned is how to be humble and you maintain humility." Because which is just like, okay, really, it's, you try here, then, I'm so great, this and that, it's like, okay, so a heyoka. So I like, if you like, but at the same time, you have to be, shall we say, cautious to make sure that
Yeah,
people understand that you're joking.
yeah, yeah. Okay, wonderful. So, if you had to give your son or somebody very close to you one book to help them on their spiritual journey, out of the books that you have chosen, which one would you recommend?
I guess it would have been Autobiography of the Yogi is the first one that first came into my mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important and it so presents so many positive possibilities. I mean, there are a gazillion others, and it's a really fun read. And it's, as an audible, it's one, if I'm having a difficult night sleep or whatnot, I want to listen to, I'll be lulled to sleep by Ben Kingsley, speaking as Paramahansa Yogananda, telling me about his adventures as a young boy meeting
Yeah,
Tiger Master or something like that.
good choice.
Way, way cool. Hey, if I could have just a last closing word.
Go ahead.
We heal the planet, we heal ourselves. We heal ourselves when we heal our planet. We can make a difference, and we have a choice.
We do indeed. Jonathan Goldman, thank you for sharing your 10 best spiritual books that influenced you the most on your journey. If anybody would like to check out Jonathan's work, I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but you can find everything you need to know, his music, his books, experience the music, sign up for his workshops at healingsounds.com. Jonathan, thank you. And thank you to all of you who joined us today and anybody else who is listening to this later.